This is the most exhaustive, detailed, deep dive into the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the current tensions within NATO and NATO with Russia. Watch this video. It might be the most important video you've ever seen on this conflict. This has been a conflict in the making for 30 years. At the beginning of the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990, the evil empire challenged by Ronald Reagan in his famous statement to tear down this wall, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker's famous "not 1 inch eastward" assurance about NATO expansion in his meeting with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev on February 9, 1990, was part of a cascade of assurances about Soviet security given by Western leaders to Gorbachev and other Soviet officials throughout the process of German reunification in 1990 and on into 1991. According to declassified U.S., Soviet, German, British, and French documents. These documents can be found in George Washington University's archive. This promise, made as a gentleman's agreement, were soon to be broken over and over again, repeatedly in a string of betrayals, as 14 countries would enter NATO over the next 20 years, before open hostilities would break out in 2022. Then the very existence of this agreement would be denied by all the principals involved, except for Russia. This was the very beginning of what could be World War III, but hopefully peace prevails, and this video is an attempt to usher in peace, truth, and reconciliation, although it might anger some on the left and in the globalist camps. This is a little piece of history that people have conveniently forgotten and that Google actively tries to hide. In January 1991, prior to the Alma-Ata Accords, Crimea held a referendum, the Crimean Sovereignty Referendum, where voters were asked whether they wanted to reestablish the Crimean Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic that had been abolished in 1954. Specifically, the referendum asked whether Crimea wanted to become an autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic as a subject of the USSR, not a subject of Ukraine. 94% of voters approved the referendum. However, Kravchuk, president of Ukraine, committed to prevent Crimea from seceding from Ukraine, visited Crimea on the day when its parliament was scheduled to vote on the law regulating the local referendum that was to be put the question of Crimea's succession to a popular vote. He convinced the former communist elite who had worked with Kiev since 1954 to postpone the vote on the law. Their opponents in parliament, represented by the Republican movement of Crimea, were outvoted. The Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined NATO in 1999. Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined NATO in 2004. Crossing Russia's red line, NATO invited Ukraine and Georgia to join in 2008. Albania and Croatia joined NATO in 2009. Montenegro joined in 2017, and North Macedonia joined in 2020.
That neither side would launch a nuclear attack because it knew the other would respond, thereby destroying both. Today, I have given formal notice to Russia, in accordance with the treaty, that the United States of America is withdrawing from this almost 30-year-old treaty. I have concluded the ABM treaty hinders our government's ability to develop ways to protect our people from future terrorists or rogue state missile attacks. The 1972 ABM treaty was signed by... We know that the terrorists and some of those who support them seek the ability to deliver death and destruction to our doorstep via missile. And we must have the freedom and the flexibility to develop effective defenses against those attacks. President Putin and I have also agreed that my decision to withdraw from the treaty will not in any way undermine our new relationship or Russian security. As President Putin said in Crawford, we are on the path to a fundamentally different relationship. Mutually assured destruction with mutual cooperation.
In 2008, NATO invited Ukraine and Georgia in for eventual membership, saying in a statement, NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agree today that these countries will become members of NATO. Both nations have made valuable contributions to alliance operations. We welcome democratic reforms in both Ukraine and Georgia and look forward to free and fair parliamentary elections in Georgia in May. MAP is the next step for Ukraine and Georgia on their direct way to membership. Today, we make clear that we support these countries' applications for MAP. Therefore, we will now begin a period of intensive engagement with both at a high political level to address the questions still outstanding pertaining to their MAP applications. We have asked foreign ministers to make a first assessment of the progress at the December 2008 meeting. Foreign ministers have the authority to decide on the MAP applications of Ukraine and Georgia.
Ja, ik denk dat dat in zijn DNA zit, en tot het uiterste. Ik denk dat hij, en dat is aan onze kant natuurlijk wel eens anders, als hij een rode lijn trekt, dan is dat een rode lijn. En die rode lijn trok hij in Boekarest, in dat gesprek met mij, en dat heeft hij uiteraard ook tegen anderen gezegd. Luister eens, dit ga ik niet accepteren. Het was nog geen NAVO-lidmaatschap van Georgië en Oekraïne, maar het was wel een belangrijke stap op weg naar de NAVO. Interessant om op te merken dat Bush dat wilde, maar dat zijn minister van Buitenlandse Zaken, Condoleezza Rice, en zijn minister van Defensie, Bob Gates in dat tijd, daar helemaal niet zo enthousiast over waren. Maar de president is de commander-in-chief. Bush drukte en drukte en drukte. Steeds grotere tegenstand van Merkel en Sarkozy, het Duits-Franse koppel, natuurlijk buitengewoon belangrijk ook binnen de NAVO. Nou, en ik zou haast willen zeggen, de rest is geschiedenis. Het communiqué kwam er en de invasie in 2008 in Georgië kwam er. En een verdere verslechtering van de relaties kwam er.
Overseas, a fierce battle broke out today on the fringe of the former Soviet Union. Tonight, Secretary of State Rice is calling on Russia to end its assault on the Republic of Georgia, now a U.S. ally. The fighting is in Georgia's province of South Ossetia, home to many Russians who are still loyal to the Kremlin and want to break away from Georgia. Richard Roth has the latest.
Columns of Russian tanks and troops rolled into the American-backed former Soviet Republic of Georgia today after a nighttime barrage of artillery fire and rockets. Georgia said it was trying to retake control of South Ossetia, the breakaway province on Russia's border that's policed by Russian peacekeepers. Claiming more than 10 of its soldiers were killed in the night attack, Moscow said it would retaliate. Russian jets bombed 4 airfields, according to Georgia, and there are conflicting reports tonight over who's controlling Ossetia's main city. Separatists there claim as many as 1,000 people have been killed in the fighting. Journalist Georgi Lomsadze.
We're very scared, and some people are trapped right now. Many civilians are trapped in their houses and their cellars as very heavy fighting still goes on.
Roads to the Russian border are filling with refugees, and Georgia's capital tonight is filled with tension.
It was a landmark deal, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed by the former Soviet Union and United States more than 30 years ago. It bans ground-launched medium-range missiles. Now President Trump wants to pull out. Speaking in Nevada, he accused Russia of violating the agreement without providing any evidence.
We're not going to let them violate a nuclear agreement and go out and do weapons, and we're not allowed to. We're the ones that have stayed in the agreement, and we've honored the agreement, but Russia has not, unfortunately, honored the agreement. So we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out.
Moscow and Washington have repeatedly accused each other of violating the treaty, a deal that helps to protect the security of the US and its allies in Europe and the Far East. Russia has condemned President Trump's intention to withdraw from the pact, the Deputy Foreign Minister saying it would be a very dangerous step. President Trump's national security advisor John Bolton is due to hold talks in Moscow next week. He's expected to tell Russian leaders the US is withdrawing from the treaty.
On 21st November 2013, Euromaidan protests happened. Many even consider this as a revolution or a defining moment in the history of modern Ukraine. Why did this protest happen? Because the then President Viktor Yanukovych and his government promised the Ukrainian public that they would sign the European Union Association Agreement. Now, on 21st November 2013, Yanukovych and his government went back on the promise and suspended the signing of European Union Association Agreement. And why did he go back on his promise? Obviously, he had the Russian pressure because Russia doesn't want Ukraine to be part of European Union. It wants Ukraine to be a neutral country. And by the way, it is no more a hidden secret. The 2014 Ukraine coup was sponsored by United States. US Ambassador Victoria Nuland's phone was tapped, wherein it was revealed that she made a call to the US Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, regarding CIA's interference in Ukrainian coup, as well as making up the next Ukrainian government.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy. You know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside.
Anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep. I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
This is a big evidence that United States government has interfered as well as sponsored the 2014 Ukraine civil unrest. Plus, at that time, Joe Biden was the vice president and today he is the president, so he is continuing where he left. Anyhow, this civil unrest went on till February 2014. Viktor Yanukovych and some of his government officials fled to Russia in early March 2014. As you know, after him, Petro Poroshenko became the president of Ukraine on 25th May 2014. By the way, US helped him to get in power. Viktor Yanukovych fled to Russia in early March 2014. That is when Russia strategically annexed and took over the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. Russia even conducted the Crimean referendum. Majority of the people in Crimea and eastern part of Ukraine are anyhow Russian speaking, so they voted in favor of the Russian Federation, and 16th March 2014 was declared as Crimea's independence. Russia took over Crimean Peninsula in March 2014. So 2014 is an important year in the history of Ukraine for three reasons. First, the Euromaidan movement came to an end. Second, the new president was elected. And third, Ukraine lost Crimea. Now, as soon as Russia took control of Crimea, Vladimir Putin publicly spoke about protecting the rights of Russian citizens and Russian speakers in Crimea and southeastern Ukraine. Ukraine lost Crimea in March 2014, and it had a fear of losing the Donbas region as well. So from March to September 2014, there was a mini war going on in the Donbas region. That's when on 5th September 2014, France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine, they came up with a ceasefire agreement through the Minsk Agreement. On 5th September 2014, the head of all these four countries, France and Germany represented OSCE, Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. They all signed the agreement, but then the agreement failed and there were ceasefire violations in Donbas region. Now both the sides started fighting brutally. Again a fresh agreement was set up. It was called Minsk II, which was signed on 12th February 2015. If you look at it from Ukraine's perspective, they want three things: ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weaponry, and full Ukrainian government control throughout the Donbas conflict zone. Now, if you see from Russia's perspective, Russia wanted autonomy of Donbas. Russia wants this region to govern itself and control its own affairs, because Russia is confident that here the people are Russian speaking and they are pro-Russians. Ukraine automatically has a problem with this, and that is why Ukraine is against the autonomy of Donbas. So this is why the Minsk agreement failed twice. Now it is very important for you to take a look at what all was written in the Minsk II agreement. It consisted of 13 points which was agreed upon. Here are the 13 points. If you look at points 4, 11 and 12, Ukraine was not in favor of it. Now if you look at the 10th point, then Russia was supposed to withdraw all its military equipment and mercenaries. And if you look at the third point, Germany and France, who represent OSCE, they had to do constant monitoring and verification. And if you see, it was actually their duty to make sure that the Minsk II is followed and implemented in full honor. Because if you look at all the 4 countries who participated and signed the Minsk agreement, today these 3 of them are fighting against Russia. But in 2015, Germany and France were supposed to play a neutral role. They were supposed to make Ukraine and Russia follow the rules. But they didn't do that. And why they didn't do it? That is what Angela Merkel revealed during her interview on 7 December. She said, the 2014 Minsk agreement was an attempt to give time to Ukraine. It also used this time to become stronger, as can be seen today. The Ukraine of 2014 and 15 is not the modern Ukraine. Basically, all the 3 partners of Minsk agreement lied and betrayed Russia. If you read Petro Poroshenko's statement, even he said the same thing what Angela Merkel said.
Good evening. You've said that the war will be over when the last piece of Ukrainian land has been liberated. Did you mean Crimea?
Of course. Aggressor should be punished.
Let's look first at the Minsk agreement, because it's looking very fragile. In the last few days, having had some months of calm, we've seen fighting breaking out again. We've seen shelling breaking out, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Now remember, the OSCE, the Organization for Security, Cooperation in Europe, is an organization that represents France and Germany.
Has been reporting a number of cease violations. Is this going to hold, this ceasefire, by and large, or these violations are going to mount? It's not working, Minsk, is it?
No.
It's not working.
No. What does it mean, Minsk agreement? This is just a peace plan.
Yeah, but you're missing the deadlines.
No.
There were deadlines for Minsk.
No. There is
you're missing the deadline. It's being shelved into next year.
We do everything we promise.
So why are your Grad rocket launchers still in territory that they shouldn't be in now, here in November, as cited by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe 2 days ago?
No.
Yes.
No. Because
they reported it. They reported it.
No.
Grad missile launchers.
No.
Yours.
No.
So why did they say your Grad missile launcher was in a place it shouldn't be? The report is wrong. You're saying it's wrong. Got it wrong then. They got it wrong.
Tim, please.
But you can't both be right. The OSCE and you can't both be right.
Please. We are responsible part of the Minsk agreement. We are fully cooperative with the OSCE.
In an interview with the German daily Der Spiegel, published on February 9th, 2023, Zelensky made it clear that he intentionally chose to sabotage Minsk. The Ukrainian leader complained that the Minsk agreements were an unacceptable concession. Zelensky recalled telling French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel that we cannot implement it. Procrastination is perfectly fine in diplomacy, Zelensky said, explaining that he only jumped on the train and pretended to support Minsk in order to negotiate a prisoner swap with Russia and give his country more time to prepare for war. Between 2016 and 2022, there was an incredible amount of misinformation, manipulation, and outright lying carried out against the United States President Donald Trump by his enemies on the political left. These dishonest, bad faith actors used Russia from the very beginning in a cynical attempt to bludgeon Trump's presidency. From the Russian collusion hoax, which alleged nebulous allegations of Russian attempts to affect the 2016 presidential election based off of a false dossier compiled by Christopher Steele, a British intelligence officer, to the allegation that Trump tried to improperly pressure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky into investigating former Vice President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, for corruption within Ukraine by withholding aid. The corrupt serial liars even tried using Russia as a scapegoat to discredit the very authentic Hunter Biden laptop that was filled with all kinds of incriminating evidence testifying to the Biden family's utter and complete corruption. The American media even floated the now discredited story that Russia was offering bounties on American soldiers to the Taliban.
Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and I met to discuss the crisis instigated by Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's borders and steps to de-escalate tensions and pursue diplomacy. Russia had previously outlined its concerns and proposals in writing.
Blinken and Stoltenberg spoke just hours after Putin announced he would seek talks with NATO to get assurances the alliance will not expand eastwards into Ukraine or deploy weaponry close to Russian borders. The day before, Putin said NATO military expansion close to Russia's borders and any deployment of missile systems in Ukraine would be crossing a red line.
And last week I told Foreign Minister Lavrov that the United States would do the same. Today, Ambassador Sullivan delivered our written response in Moscow. There are core principles that we are committed to uphold and defend, including Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the right of states to choose their own security arrangements and alliances. We're not releasing the document publicly because we think that diplomacy has the best chance to succeed if we provide space for confidential talks. We hope and expect that Russia will have the same view and will take our proposal seriously. I expect to speak to Foreign Minister Lavrov in the coming days after Moscow has had a chance to read the paper and is ready to discuss next steps. Without going into the specifics of the document, I can tell you that it reiterates what we've said publicly for many weeks and in a sense for many years, that we will uphold the principle of NATO's open door.
There is no change in the U.S. and NATO position in this document.
First of all, there is no change. There will be no change. Second, we reiterate that principle. Of course, it is for NATO, not the United States unilaterally, to discuss the open door policy. These are decisions that NATO makes as an alliance, not the United States unilaterally. But from our perspective, I can't be more clear. NATO's door is open, remains open, and that is our commitment.
We have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable. There is nothing unclear about this. We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house. So, are we demanding something excessive? We're simply asking them not to deploy their attack systems over at our home. What is so unusual or peculiar about that? So, what would the Americans think if we, for example, decided to come to the border between, say, Canada and the United States or Mexico and simply deploy our missiles over there? Well, did Mexico and the U.S. never have any territorial disputes? What about California? What about Texas? Did you forget about that? But everything seems to have calmed down. Nobody remembers those things. This is about security. It is not the negotiations that matter. It is the outcome, the result. I've reiterated this many times, and you're well aware that we said not an inch to the east. That was the NATO guarantee in 1990. So what became of that? They fooled us. We've seen 5 waves of NATO expansion. Now they're in Romania and in Poland. and they're deploying the relevant attack systems over there. That's what we're talking about. You should finally understand we're not threatening anyone. We did not come to the US borders or to the UK borders. No. They came to our borders, and now they're saying that Ukraine will also join NATO and they will deploy their systems there. Or not just NATO, they will simply deploy it on a bilateral basis. They will deploy their military bases and their attack systems. That's what we're talking about. And you keep demanding some guarantees from us. You must give us the guarantees. It is up to you, and you must do this immediately, right now, instead of keep talking about this for decades. And use this small talk and soft talk about the need for guarantees of security for everyone. Back in the 1990s, the Soviet Union did everything it could to build normal relations with the West, with the United States. Why did you have to support the terrorists in Northern Caucasus and use the terrorist organizations to reach your goals and break down the Russian Federation? This was exactly what you were doing, and as a former director of the FSB, I know that. We were working with the double agents, and they were reporting to us on the tasks of the Western intelligence agencies. Why did you have to do that? You should have done something different, perhaps treat Russia as a possible ally and strengthen trust. But no, instead you tried to keep breaking us up. And then you started the NATO expansion to the east. We were saying, don't do that. You had promised you wouldn't. And they say, where is it put in written form? Nowhere. Well, then naff off, and we don't care about your concerns.
The European Union's top diplomat says Russia has concentrated more than 150,000 troops on Ukraine's border and in annexed Crimea. Josep Borrell declined to give a source for the figure, but said that the risk of further escalation is evident.
What does Kyiv expect from the United States if the worst-case scenario happens and those Russian troops come over the border? What kind of support are they expecting?
What they're hoping for first is weaponry. They want more advanced weaponry. They want anti-aircraft missiles. They also want U.S. troops to be sent here now as advisors, as tripwire troops. There are training forces that come and go from the UK, from the United States, but they number in the dozens. What officials in this country would like is hundreds of foreign trainers, particularly Americans, to come, not under the NATO umbrella. They want them to come flying their own flags, and they want them to be stationed near the border so that if Russian troops do cross over, they will run into those troops, even if they're just in a small number, not enough number to confront physically the advancing Russian troops, but to send a signal that the United States or the UK are now in active conflict with Russia.
Ukraine, Poland and Lithuania to call for more Western sanctions.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia. My guess is he will move in. He has to do something.
Ukrainian officials reacted with shock with what President Biden said when he talked about a minor incursion might be a different situation.
And so we see that the seeds for the current conflict were set back in the 1990s, throughout the 2000s, and have now finally culminated in the 2020s. This is how the Ukrainian-Russian war started.